Okay, so you guys have sent in some really interesting stuff this time.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving deep into Jillian Turecki's It Begins With You.
Right.
And,
A lot of good stuff in there.
yeah, I've been looking through it, and I think it
Yeah.
has the potential
Oh, yeah.
to
For
really
sure.
help people
Mm-hmm.
understand
Yeah.
some really important things about relationships.
And themselves. I think that's the key. It all begins with you.
Right.
Right? Exactly.
The title is so perfect.
Yeah. And this is coming from a really interesting perspective because Jillian
Yeah.
started as a yoga instructor.
Yeah, that's right.
And so she brings that understanding of the body,
Right.
the mind, and the breath
The breath, yeah.
into her relationship coaching.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating, unique perspective.
Yeah.
Like you said, the mind-body connection is
Right.
it's everything. And what's cool is she talks about how she can almost sense,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
read people's tension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in their jaw
Right.
or their breath or if they're grinding their teeth.
Even over the phone, she says.
Even over the phone, she could pick up on it. It's wild.
Right.
So that's interesting.
And she links that to feeling unsafe or...
Yeah, lack of control. Like when we feel like things are out of our hands, our body kind of responds in that way.
So the body's kind of telling us
Yeah.
things sometimes we might not even be aware of.
Yeah. And the breath is such an interesting
Right.
part of that.
Right.
Because, we can use our breath to calm ourselves down or to energize ourselves.
I mean, it's like that.
It's a tool we always have with us.
That available tool
Exactly.
that we're often not even using.
Right.
Right. So if you notice that you're physically tense, that might be a sign that there's something emotionally that you haven't addressed.
That's right. And it can impact our relationships big time.
Right.
Think about it. If you're walking around with a tight jaw all day
Right.
because you're suppressing frustration or anger,
Right.
You're going to bring that into your interactions with your partner.
Even if you don't
realize it.
think you are.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Jillian's saying that things like movement and conscious breathing aren't just...
They're not just physical.
For our physical health.
Right.
It's actually really foundational to
our emotional well-being. Yeah.
Our emotional well-being.
And our relationships.
And consequently our relationship.
It all comes back to that.
Right.
If we can find a way to feel stronger and more grounded. Internally.
Yeah.
Then that's going to create a more solid foundation for positive interactions.
Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is this idea that building great relationships is a skill.
It's a skill. Yeah.
It's not something that we're just...
It's not something we're born with.
Right.
It's something we have to learn.
We spend so much time learning, practical skills.
Right.
But when it comes to relationships, it's like we're just supposed to figure it out.
Right. Like it should just come naturally.
And Jillian really stresses
she does.
the importance of inner work.
Yeah.
So what does that actually look like?
Well, she talks about, being willing to face our fears.
Yeah.
To make mistakes.
Right.
To understand that relationships should support our nervous system.
Right.
Not throw them into overdrive.
Right.
And sometimes that means taking things slow.
Yeah.
Not rushing into commitment.
Right.
Not playing house, as she calls it.
Right.
Which I think
playing house
is a brilliant term because it can be tempting to just jump into that comfort of like, we're already a couple.
Right.
But without actually doing the work of getting to know each other.
And I think that probably stems from...
I think so too.
A fear of...
Fear of abandonment.
Right.
Fear of being alone.
Yeah. And maybe just feels like a shortcut.
It does.
To feeling secure.
It's like a Band-Aid solution.
Right.
Yeah.
But ultimately doesn't actually...
But it doesn't really address the underlying issue.
Address anything.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And she has this great story about a woman named Jennifer.
Oh, yeah.
Who basically was so focused on finding a partner.
Right.
That she wasn't
taking care of herself.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that when she decided to turn her attention inward.
Yeah.
And focus on...
her own values.
Yeah, her values, inner peace.
Yeah.
Open communication, honesty. That's when she was actually able...
That's when she attracted a healthy relationship. Yeah. It's like she had to get her own house in order first.
Right.
Before she could invite someone else in.
Before she could have a healthy relationship with somebody else.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And this really speaks to this idea of, recognizing those patterns.
Those negative patterns.
Negative patterns.
And that we can get stuck in.
That we get stuck in.
Yeah.
In relationships.
And often they come from this place of feeling not enough.
Right, not enough. Or feeling like love is conditional.
Like we have to earn it.
Yeah, or being afraid of it being withheld.
Absolutely.
Right. So there's some really deep stuff going on there.
There is.
That we need to kind of uncover and figure out.
Yeah, we have to do that inner work.
Right.
Of understanding where those patterns come from.
Right. And really taking responsibility.
Responsibility for our part.
For the choices that we make.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, not just blaming.
But just pointing the finger
at other people.
Right.
And, you know, she talks about this idea.
She does.
Of the monkey mind.
Yeah.
Which I think.
It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It really captures.
Such a great
visual. Yeah. Right. Yeah. This idea that our mind
is just constantly chattering.
It's just like
a monkey,
you know, jumping from branch to branch,
swinging from the trees.
Right. Full of anxiety.
Yeah.
Judgments.
Right.
Negative self-talk.
And how much that.
And it can really sabotage our relationships.
Yeah.
You know, if we're constantly in that state of mind.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting for us, and it's exhausting for the people around us.
Right.
Yeah.
And it can really.
It can really distort our perception of things.
Distort our perception of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she really stresses the importance
of questioning those stories. That's what we tell ourselves.
Yeah, the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, especially during conflicts or after a breakup.
Yeah, and she has this great example with Christina.
Yeah.
Who was blaming her husband.
Yeah,
for all of their problems. Yeah. And through the coaching, she started to realize.
She started to see her own part in it.
Yeah.
You know?
Her own contribution to the dynamic.
And that's huge because once we can see our own part, then we have the power to change it.
Right.
Right.
We can actually do something about it.
It's not just about blaming the other person.
Right. And she also talks about Sarah, who reframed her breakup as a result of
fundamental differences.
Yeah, like their values.
Right.
Rather than a personal rejection.
Yeah, it wasn't that he didn't love her. It was just that they had different paths they wanted to take in life.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, you know.
And that can be so freeing.
Much more empowering.
See it that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's talk about self-care.
Yeah.
Because I know that's a big part of.
Huge part
Jill,
of this.
Yeah, her whole approach.
Her approach.
Yeah.
And she really
defines it as.
So it defines it as.
Nurturing the relationship we have with ourselves.
Right.
Which I think is so important.
Yeah.
Because we can't have healthy relationships with others.
Right.
If we don't have a healthy relationship with ourselves.
Right.
Right.
And she particularly speaks to.
Yeah.
You know, people who are.
Highly sensitive people.
Highly sensitive.
Givers. People pleasers.
Yeah.
You know, those folks who are always putting others first.
Right.
She's like, you need to prioritize yourself.
Right.
You need to honor your own needs. And she talks about some specific.
Yeah, she lays out
daily
practices
that we can do.
Yeah.
Starting with movement.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And not necessarily like.
Not like punishing yourself.
Yeah, crazy workouts.
Right.
Just finding
things that feel good in your body.
Yeah, things that give you energy.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's
a walk. Some gentle yoga.
Right.
Walk.
Pilates.
Maybe it's dancing.
Maybe it's putting on some music.
Right.
And dancing around your living room.
Right.
Whatever makes you feel good.
Whatever feels good.
Yeah.
And she really.
And she talks about the benefits of being in nature.
Yeah, being in nature as part of that.
Yeah, going for a walk in the park.
Right.
You know.
Hiking in the woods.
Feeling the sun on your skin.
Right.
The fresh air.
Yeah.
It's all so good for us.
And then she talks about.
Play.
Which I think is so underrated.
Yeah.
As adults, we forget how to play.
We get so serious.
Yeah, we get so caught up in, our responsibilities, our to-do lists.
Right.
And we forget to just have fun.
Yeah. And be silly. And so she's saying that that's actually really.
It's actually really important for our relationships.
Yeah.
You know, it keeps things fresh.
Right.
It keeps things alive.
It keeps things light.
Yeah, it brings in laughter.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just good for our soul.
It's good for our soul. Yeah. And then, of course, there's rest.
Rest.
Which is probably the most important and the most neglected. Yeah.
Because we live in such a
go culture,
right.
You know. We're always on.
We're doing something.
We're always connected. We're always checking our phones.
Right.
And so we forget to just.
Slow down. And rest. Right. And she has a really good story about.
Yeah, she talks about Kelly.
Who
realized that her own stress was overwhelming her husband. She was so stressed out, and she was trying to control everything, and he was just like, well, it's like space.
I need some space.
Right. And so it's a really good example of how,
how our own
stress affects our relationships.
Affects our relationships.
Okay. So
let's move into this idea of attraction.
Yeah.
Because that's
a $1 million question.
$1 million question.
Right.
Like, why are we attracted to?
Why are we attracted to who we're attracted to?
Certain people.
Right.
And not others.
And she talks about,
pheromones.
Subconscious familiarity.
Yeah.
All these
always factors.
Different theories.
And one of the things that she talks about is this idea
that we can be subconsciously attracted to people who remind us of our parents, which is interesting because it can be for better, for worse.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes it can lead us to reenact some of those painful dynamics.
From our childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she talks about Adam, who had this intense attraction to somebody.
Yeah, he was so drawn to her.
But there were all these red flags.
Right.
Yeah. About their long-term compatibility.
Yeah. Their values were different.
Right.
Their lifestyles were different.
Their goals were different.
Right. Yeah.
And she talks about this idea of
playing house.
Yeah. Which is basically
skipping the getting to know you phase.
Right.
And just jumping right into.
Like we're already
a committed couple.
Yeah, committed couple.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot.
I think it does.
Right.
Yeah.
People get caught up
in the excitement,
in the
novelty.
The novelty of a new relationship.
And they mistake that for what's actually necessary for a lasting relationship.
A long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And so she really emphasizes
taking it slow.
Yeah. And asking yourself those tough questions.
Yeah, doing those check-ins with yourself. Like, how do I really feel?
Yeah, how do I feel?
When I'm with this person.
Right.
Do I like the person I become when I'm around them?
Do I like myself
when I'm
around them? Do we share?
Values?
Yeah.
Do we have similar goals?
Yeah.
How do they handle stress?
Right.
These are all important questions to ask.
And I think sometimes we avoid asking those questions.
We do.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we're afraid.
Because we're afraid of the answers.
Right. Of what the answers might be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So another thing that's really important is this idea
of speaking your truth.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Being able to express
your needs,
your opinions,
your preferences. Yeah.
And she distinguishes between having needs
and being needy. Which is a really important distinction.
Right. What's the difference there?
So being needy is more about expecting your partner to constantly make you happy.
Right. To be responsible for
your happiness.
Yeah. And your security.
And it's like
a bottomless pit.
Yeah. It's never enough. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas having needs
is just part of being human.
Yeah.
And being in a relationship.
We all have needs.
Right.
And it's healthy to express them.
Right.
Yeah.
And she talks about this trap.
Yeah.
Of being
the go with the flow girl.
The good girl.
The nice guy.
Yeah. Where you're
so afraid of
rejection
or conflict that you just press your knees.
Say what you really want.
Yeah. You just go along with whatever the other person wants.
Right.
Yeah.
And she shares
Emma's story.
Emma's journey of learning to speak out.
Yeah.
And say
what she wants.
Yeah, what she really wants.
Yeah.
And needs.
The needs.
Right.
Yeah.
And she also talks about the importance
of standing your ground.
Yeah. In disagreements.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Not from a place of ego.
From a place of ego.
Right.
But from a place of
truth.
Truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And she talks about
managing our breath.
Yeah.
During those moments.
Yeah, staying connected to our body.
So
that we can
stay grounded.
Respond.
Yeah.
Rather than just react.
And respond from that place of the higher self.
And she differentiates between the lower self and the higher self.
She does.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
the lower self is
like
scared,
reactive,
controlling part of us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That just wants to
protect itself.
Yeah. And the higher self is
more
wise,
more calm,
more confident. Confident.
Passionate.
Right.
And so
she's encouraging us to really
tap into
that higher self.
Yeah.
And she gives the example.
And she gives the example of Rachel and Jason.
Yeah.
Who
were stuck in this cycle of blaming.
Yeah, blaming each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And neither of them were willing to
take responsibility.
Take responsibility for their part.
Right.
Yeah.
And she says that
change is motivated by positive reinforcement.
Right.
Not punishment.
Right.
So we can't force...
You can't force someone...
to change.
Yeah. You can't punish someone into changing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so self-awareness is really key.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Recognizing
how our past hurts are showing up in our present relationships.
Right.
Yeah. And how
our emotional state is impacting our behavior. Right.
Yeah.
And she talks about this feeling of powerlessness. That can come up.
That can come up in insecure relationships.
Right, in insecure relationships.
Yeah.
And she says
we need to find ways. To feel more secure within ourselves.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she talks about
the savior archetype.
The savior.
Healer
archetype.
Yeah. Where we choose partners who need rescuing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she gives the example of
Amanda, who was in a relationship with a married man.
Right.
And she was
trying to be his savior.
Yeah. And I think
that can be a way of
it's a way of avoiding
our own insanity
issues.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And she makes this really important point.
She does.
That you can't convince someone to love you.
You can't convince someone to commit to you.
Right. You can't.
Not if they don't want to.
Convince someone to commit to you if they don't want to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes
we get caught up in that chase.
We get caught up in the chase.
Yeah.
And we forget that.
And we forget that we have the power
to
choose ourselves.
Yeah. And so